Gospel of John, Jesus memorably says, "If you hold to my teaching, you really are my disciples, and then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Now, my wife and I have settled down into routines in the course of lockdown, as I'm sure most of us have. Last evening, for example, having given our dogs their last ball throwing session of the day, I watered the garden. Well, I say garden. What I really mean is I was watering the bit of garden where we've scattered bee bombs in this last week to encourage wildlife and insects in particular. And then I watered my Christmas trees as well. Now, watering the garden is such a clearly mindless occupation, isn't it really? But at least it gives a person time to ponder the deeper things of life in lockdown, and even to consider events outside our protected bubble, into which we have settled with comparative ease, if truth be told. What occurred to me was that some of us have always lived in some kind of bubble, even when we haven't realised it. I don't know if you've ever seen the Jim Carrey film, The Truman Show, in which he plays a man who is living inside a TV reality show. Everything around him is carefully constructed to convince him that it's real, but everyone in his life is actually an actor, and he's the only one who does not know that. And when he begins to suspect that something is not quite right, he tries to escape and is always thwarted. His final attempt at escape is to sail a boat away from the unreal town where he grew up. He thinks he's escaped, right up until the moment when his sailing boat collides with the sky. Because the horizon isn't a horizon, you see. It's just another form of barrier. It's a different edge of the same bubble for Truman. The United States has seen its city streets all over the country filled with people protesting at the murder of George Floyd, an African American who'd been suspected, or at least accused, of the relatively innocuous crime of passing a forged $20 bill in a shop. His treatment at the hands of some uniformed police officers from Minneapolis was filmed. And it's clear that they need to answer for what they did to him, which was nothing short of brutally outrageous. As yet, all 4 officers present have been dismissed. And the one who knelt on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes as he lay handcuffed in the roadway and caused his death from asphyxiation has been charged with serious crimes, including murder and what we would call in this country manslaughter. Sadly, I have to say that it isn't the first time that a person of colour in the United States has been brutalised and killed by those who are supposed to be upholding law and order. Many black people, mostly men, in the course of innocently pursuing their lawful and constitutional right to life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness, as the Declaration of Independence says, have died at the hands of white men, many of whom have been police officers. I'm remembering Rodney King in Los Angeles all those years ago, but I'm also thinking about a very recent case where one poor man was murdered by 2 civilian white men whilst he was out for a jog. And they did it purely because he wouldn't respond to their demands that he stop running and submit to their version of a citizen's arrest by telling them what right he had to be in their neighbourhood. It took weeks before these 2 people, a white father and his son, were detained or charged for what they did to that innocent African American citizen, purely on the grounds of his skin colour and ethnic background. And of course, he's just one of many. Such outright prejudice and bigotry has been America's shame since the end of the Civil War, which was supposed to end such discrimination. That it failed to do so is self-evident, not just from memories of lynchings and cross-burnings in the Deep South in the intervening century and a half, but in the way prejudice was allowed to be reinstitutionalised in segregated schooling and bars and water fountains, and the Jim Crow laws in the Deep South, which were maintained right up until a landmark Supreme Court ruling, Brown versus the Board of Education, brought the whole ugly mess of bigotry into international prominence in the 1960s. But that was the 1960s. When I see the historic photograph of a little black girl being escorted into a white school, protected by police officers and surrounded with the hatred of adult, white, privileged people, I have to remind myself that when that photograph was taken, I was about her age. So why is it that we are still reading about such hateful treatment, albeit different in circumstance, nigh on 60 years later? Well, it isn't just true of America, of course. In my lifetime, in this country, in London, black people looking for accommodation have been turned away by signs in windows reading "No Irish, no blacks, no dogs." And I grew up in a culture which, quite frankly, had no difficulty in laughing and joking on television about people who'd emigrated from the Caribbean or the Indian subcontinent or Africa, and doing so in terms which were not only derogatory but dehumanising. And no, it wasn't just banter. So how do we root out this deep-seated corruption? Because it seems to me that we white people have constructed a Truman Show-style bubble of our own, in which we can pretend that all is rosy in the garden. We can convince ourselves that racism and religious and cultural bigotry have no place in our society because it doesn't happen to us, or because we can convince ourselves that we do not carry within ourselves or in our society the cancer of racism. But we need to take the courage to break out of the bubble we've constructed for ourselves, in which our misunderstanding of our own history has encased us, to take a different view from a different angle on the centuries of unequal interracial relationships which white people have foisted on people of colour. And to do that, we need to shut up and listen. Listen not to the siren voices of the wealthy and privileged, who've had their hands on the levers of power and will convince you and me that this bubble we live in is the real world, but to the voices of those who are suffering today from the kind of insidious oppression which is ingrained in our society and culture, and which makes what seems so ordinary and unexceptional to the privileged, a jog in the sun or a trip to the store, a situation fraught with danger because of the colour of someone's skin, or the language they speak, or the religion they follow. We must begin again to learn and to know unflinchingly the truth, for the truth will set us all free. Stay safe, people.